Not too long ago, we acquired our own little piece of Alaska. I could do a whole nother video on how to acquire land in Alaska, and I probably will. Our piece of property was owned by the state of Alaska. It was clear-cut about 50 or 60 years ago, and all the timber was harvested off of it. About 20 or 30 years ago, it was sold in what they call a state land sale. It was bought by a concrete ready-mix company, and for many years, thousands and thousands of truckloads of sand and gravel were removed from the property. Over time, eventually all the good stuff was pulled out, and they decided they wanted to sell. We happened to find out about it before anybody else, and we got the first chance, and we jumped on it. They'd cut all the timber off of it. Normally that'd seem like a bad thing, but in our part of Alaska, sunlight is a rarity. Not being in deep dark timber means you get a little bit more of that sun, which is a great thing. As you can see, there's a lot of tall trees surrounding the property, so it wasn't like there was a shortage of trees. This is what our property looked like from the air when we bought it. When we bought it, there was still all of the machinery from the gravel pit in place, and one of the things we had to do to get started was to get all of that removed. While we had all that heavy equipment on site, we took advantage of it. Getting a piece of property ready to build on was way more of a challenge than I would have ever anticipated. If we hadn't had such great equipment, it would have been weeks, maybe months worth of work. Just as important as that heavy equipment was the operators. All three of the operators we worked with had over 30 or 40 years of experience, and you just can't replace that. They were incredibly efficient, and they weren't afraid to work long hours, so in about a week we got an incredible amount of work done. I've truly been amazed by the number of generous and good, hardworking people that I've met in Alaska. As you can see, we're not truly remote or off-grid, but it is 30 to 45 minutes to the nearest grocery store, so it's definitely not an urban environment. One of the favorite features of our property is a spectacular waterfall you can see from just about anywhere. All of the equipment to work on our property had to come in by barge. As you can see, it's no small amount of equipment. We were fighting the tides at the time. The tide was going out fast. By the time we got it offloaded, there was only about 3 inches of water underneath the barge. It was really cutting it close, but not too unusual for this part of the country. The first order of business was to remove the sand and gravel separator system from the property. This was a pretty good sized piece of equipment, and it took a couple days to accomplish. Here's what it looked like from the ground. The first step was to remove all the washed sand. That's a valuable resource. I expect I'll be making a lot of concrete in the next few years. With all the sand removed, now it was time to pull off the conveyor. We used a track hoe to accomplish this. Had to climb up on top to loosen everything up. Then we set it onto a semi to be hauled away. The next order was to remove the grizzly, which separates the big rocks from the sand and the gravel, including the highway barriers that were supporting it from underneath. To do this, we simply hooked onto the grizzly with a chain in the front end loader and pulled it back from the edge. Once it was safely back from the edge, then we could begin moving the highway barriers one at a time, just kind of like Legos, put them off to the side. Once they were all out, we stacked them up. I'll use these later in my building process for sure. With the grizzly out of the way, next we had to remove the separating machine. As you can see, the machine has wheels on the back end, so they simply moved about 100 tons of dirt, stacked it up around the back end of the machine, and then used the track hoe on one end and a front end loader on the other, and slowly lowered it down the ramp. It sounds easy, but it really was a very coordinated effort, but it went without a flaw. Once that was hauled off, essentially the lower portion of my property was all done. Most of that dirt got used to build up my garage pad and driveway. With the separator out of the way, the next step was to remove the rock crusher. This had been used to break rocks into gravel. Here's what it looked like from the ground. As you can see, there were a few pieces, but it came out pretty easily. With the crusher out of the way, we could put our cabin in place. This was going to be our home away from home for the next few years. We put it up on blocks, one to eliminate access to rodents, but two to give us some covered storage underneath. This has worked out fairly well. The step out of the front door was kind of a doozy, so later on we added a pile of gravel there, which made it a lot easier to get in and out. With most of the machine removed, the next order of business was to remove a lot of the slash that was left in the northeast corner of our land. The soil underneath the slash was fairly fertile, and at some point this will become our orchard and perhaps our garden. It's amazing how big of a bonfire you can build if you're using a track hoe. Any Boy Scout would be jealous. Here it's just barely getting going. Once you're about as high as a track hoe can reach, you know you've got a fire. That's my wife in the picture, just for a frame of reference. It took over a week to get all that slash burned. The soil under the slash was pretty soft and guaranteed the track hoe would get stuck, so we just used logs to make a road and then pulled them out as we left. Ended up with a big stack of firewood, one of about 4 on my place right now. I don't know if I can ever get it all burned, but we'll give it a shot for sure. Here the pile's starting to get smaller and smaller. While we were burning the slash, we also took the time to get the southeast corner of the property smooth, flat, and level, or at least as smooth and flat as you can with a track hoe. They did an amazing job. This area had served as the dumping grounds for all of the material that wasn't commercially useful. We haven't yet decided what we're going to use this portion of the property for, but it's sure nice to have it ready to go. With the front portion of the property all smoothed out, we also took this opportunity to build the foundation for our greenhouse. It's modeled after the greenhouse in the snow design out of Nebraska. Not everybody gets the opportunity to use highway barriers as their material, but since we had it available, that's what we used. One of the most important parts that we needed to get done was to get a building pad for our house. It's essentially going to go right in the center of the property. We should have a great view from there. That big pile of dirt had to be moved. Mostly it got leveled out into the building pad. For this portion of the project, we used the front end loader, the track hoe, as well as a bulldozer to get everything where it needed to be. Again, it's amazing what can happen with 3 experienced operators. I think they got this done in like a quarter of a day. Our plan at this time was to use the highway barriers and concrete blocks as part of our foundation. We may change our minds, but that's where we're at for now. In addition to the house, we also wanted to get the pad and driveway for our garage built. They were able to accomplish this in a short amount of time, just like everything else. It's amazing what you can get accomplished in a week with the right type of equipment. I can't say thank you enough to the former owners of the land for all the help they gave us. The first day I looked at it, I was actually pretty depressed, thinking this was going to be weeks, months, or maybe even years to get what they got done in a week accomplished. Here's some aerial shots they took for me after they were done, showing how everything looked at the end. We still have a lot of work to get accomplished before the homestead's the way we want it. In fact, this is just the end of the very, very beginning. We can't wait to see what adventures we have as we develop our own little piece of Alaska.